Hi, I'm Michael. Welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each episode we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today, we are finishing off our series on the Bourne trilogy with the Bourne Ultimatum, the 2007 film written by Tony Gilroy, Scott Z. Burns, and George Nolfi, directed by Paul Greengrass, based on the novel by Robert Ludlum. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Rand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
All right, so we've come to the end of the trilogy, of the Bourne trilogy. Watching this movie was very strange for me. When we talked about the supremacy last week, I mentioned that I hadn't quite finished. I was like halfway through the film at that point. And you guys kind of gave a reaction of like, oh, you don't remember that? And I want to return to what you guys think that was or what that was in reference to. But watching this movie for me was this weird up and down where the movie started and it was further back in time than I thought. Like it was picking up from the chase, which took me a second. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're continuing there. But then it kind of jumps ahead and I was like on board with it. And then there's this big twist where like as Bourne, he gets to New York and he's getting set up and now he's looking into the office and then he sees Pamela Landy and suddenly I'm watching the Bourne Supremacy, the end of the Bourne Supremacy. Mm-hmm. And I was legitimately like very thrown and confused. I was like, did I start watching the wrong movie? Like it was a very disorienting thing. All this to say, I want to talk about the structure of the movie and that choice to make this a kind of prequel, but not. It's kind of an interesting, I don't know how I feel about it, but I clearly feel a lot of ways. But besides that, there are a lot of things in this movie that I really like and feel like they doubled down on from the supremacy. The traits that were kind of emerging in that I was resonating with. And then there's some parts where I kind of zone out and kind of get fatigued, especially during kind of the middle chase scene, like that whole extended sequence there. Plot-wise, I don't know that all of it makes sense. It feels like there's a lot of MacGuffin and a lot of yada yada, and it seems like the movie doesn't quite care as much about like the tidy plot connections and those dominoes falling. But what I was struck by this time is how hard this movie went at, this is the end of a trilogy. We're gonna wrap up, answer questions, go hard on theme. Like the whole last like 15, 20 minutes, I was like very surprised by. Like this is really going for something that they didn't need to try to do in an action movie. Like this feels like they're going for something elevated. So watching this movie was like a lot of ups and downs for me and going to unexpected places and a lot of things that I just really didn't remember, but appreciated and or found like less interesting than my hazy memory of them. So that's my opening on the Bourne Ultimatums. I'm still trying to kind of figure out as a whole how I feel about it. But some of my favorite moments from the trilogy are absolutely in this movie. Trisha, what about you?
Yeah, I love this movie. The thing that impresses me most about it is knowing that this script was not written when they started shooting. And so there are so many million ways that this could have gone very badly. And the fact that it's actually an incredibly solid, very exciting action movie, all of those things are very impressive. But then, as you're pointing out, it really wraps things up in what I think is like a very satisfying way, like answers questions without being too neat or trite about like thematic things. And like, I feel like it fully explores the where Bourne lands, like sort of resolves a lot of things for him without feeling, like it's, I don't know, without feeling like too on the nose or like tied up so neatly that it's implausible. I think it adheres to the rules of its own story world and still feels very grounded and very plausible for the character to end up where he ends up. But yet at the same time, I like have no more like lingering questions. And so the fact that none of that was written when they set out to make this movie Matt Damon, I remember reading an interview with him at the time. He had like a baby at home. There was like a newborn at home and like wasn't sleeping, was like incredibly sleep deprived the whole time he was making this also. And yeah, it was just like apparently very chaotic on set in terms of what anybody's shooting. I'm like, you did it. I don't know how you did it under those circumstances. I don't know how this is as good of a movie as it is. And so, yeah, I just really, I don't know. When he falls into the water at the end, and it's like, clearly we've brought him full circle. Here he is back in the water, ready to be born again for the third time. This phase is over, right? We're going to do it again. I'm like, yes, standing up, cheering. And that ending wasn't written when they started making this movie. And all of that, I'm just like, this is sheer serendipity, like happy accidents. I don't know. Or experience, professionalism, dumb luck, all of it, probably. So yeah, really enjoy it. Can't wait to talk more.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely want to talk about the ending a lot. So we already said that. I'm saying it again so we make sure we talk about the ending because I have lots of thoughts and questions. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of what Trisha was saying real quick, there are stories about Tony Gilroy. Basically, he had all the stuff he wanted to do with the script. He turned it in. Even Matt Damon was like, it wasn't good. And Tony Gilroy's like, I'm out. I don't want to do this. And then other screenwriters were brought on board. Tom Stoppard did a draft. Like it was all sorts of stuff going on. So it is really surprising that it feels as cohesive and as well thought through as it does. Because I sort of always assumed that the split between Gilroy and Damon Greengrass happened after this when they made the fourth and fifth movie separately. But it was like during this movie where he was just like, I'm done with this thing. But did I ever tell you guys about the time I was interviewed by the CIA?
Of course you were.
Wow.
No, but go ahead.
Yeah. I had a friend who was applying for a job there. And he cited me as a reference. So this guy called me and he wanted to find a place to meet. And, eventually we decided on my house. And he said, okay.
Was it Albert Finney?
No, it was picture Scott Glenn from this movie.
Nice.
Yeah. Just like an old man in a long coat. It smelled like he made love to a pack of cigarettes on the way over. And he was just so straight-laced and humorless. He'd be like, okay, so has your friend ever engaged in any bad behavior? And I'd try to just make a joke like, oh, well, no more than the rest of us. And he'd be like, what do you mean by that? And like, oh, no, he's not. No, he has not. Jesus. And it was a very strange experience. Ultimately, my friend, after a long interview process, did not get the job. So then fast
Whose
forward.
fault was that, Brian?
Yes, I assume it was entirely my fault. But then fast forward to a couple months later when we were watching the Bourne Ultimatum, and my friend is just having a great time watching the CIA be confused for 2 hours and confounded and being thrown for a loop by Jason Bourne. Then I had to do the same thing again for a different friend with the Secret Service, and that was a much better experience, and that friend did get the job. So the story has a happy ending.
You learned a lesson.
Just not for the
Maybe
other
you're a compulsive liar. Where do you get this? Is insane that this is your life.
You're not that much older than us, Brian. How many collective years of life can have all these experiences?
I wasn't in the CIA and the Secret Service.
The people that you know.
So anyway, this movie, yeah, I like it a lot. I do feel like it feels like it doesn't have quite as much soul or depth or something as the previous two movies. So I feel like there's a little bit of a parabolic shape for me where it's like the first movie just feels so good, but is rough. And then the second movie is like, it has the mood and the sort of depth of the first movie, but feels really solid. And then this movie feels really solid, but maybe loses a little bit of that, whatever that thing is. I don't know. It's like, does the plot matter quite as much? And is the theme quite as strong or whatever, right? That being said, I love this movie. And like I said, on the in the first episode, I was just, by the time this movie was around, I'm like, I'm so happy with Bourne. So it's like when a band puts out an album that sounds like more of the same, you're like, yeah, but I like the same, it's good. So I feel like this movie feels a little bit more of the same, but I also love what it is, and really feel like, as you're talking about, Michael, in that last act, it's like we have we bring back the professor quote from the first movie. We put him back in the water. Then we get Nikki, and she's listening to the news, and then the music comes and they swim. It's like, yeah, like it just feels like so. I'm like so happy. Just like I said last episode, just all three of these movies, when they end, I just feel so happy and satisfied and just like pumped.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, Alex, what about you?
Yeah, so as I realized during this experience of covering these movies, I had not seen these sequels, even though I kind of had a hazy sense that I had. So it's been really interesting seeing them for the first time. And my experience watching Bourne Supremacy was, wow, this is way better than I thought it was. I like it way more than I thought I would. And this one, kind of to what Brian was saying, it did feel like more of the same, not in a bad way, but it felt like more like we had settled into now. I used to love watching 24, the Jack Bauer series. It felt more like, oh, this is another episode of the 24 of Jason Bourne. So it's like we're doing it again, and that's fun, but it wasn't this evolution that I'd felt from the first movie to the second movie. And that's, as Brian's saying, that's fine. Like, I had a really good time. But it did feel like there were some scenes where it's like, okay, we're kind of just doing a twist on a sequence from the previous movie now. And instead of Nikki on the train, we're doing Guardian reporter in the train terminal. Like, there's these kind of archetypal set pieces that, we've had two movies now of like Jason Bourne scenes, and now I can feel those patterns, and we are mixing them up. We're doing some new things with them, but it felt more repetitive than, once again, Supremacy following Identity. And I think just because Identity, once again, as we identified in the last episode, is such a different movie in so many ways. It's Bourne is confused. Bourne is not a fully realized agent. Bourne is on the run, just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And both these movies are kind of now the more Jack Bauer agent Bourne at his full capacity in the cat and mouse game twice with the CIA. And once again, I will watch many episodes of this because it's really fun, but it's just a different step. It's like a horizontal step versus a vertical step. So I liked it. I less, in Supremacy, I could very clearly tell you like the arc of that movie and what happened from the first viewing. From one viewing of this movie, I'm not sure I could tell you what happened. I know that there was like a Guardian article. They went to Tangier, and some guy had his cell phone had lots of pictures on it that changed all the time for different targets. He decides not to shoot Edgar Ramirez, and he looks through the sniper rifle, and it's the end of the last movie, and whoa, twist. But I'm not really sure how that all flowed together or how it all added up. But it was a really fun ride.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting. I was thinking about these movies as a trilogy and the time apart from each of them, where like I know I saw each of them in a theater, and I feel like each time it felt like a lot of time had passed since the previous one. And so I feel like in theaters, the more of the sameness didn't bother me that much, because it was like more time had passed between these things. But also so much time had passed since the first and the third that I'm absolutely sure the callback references to the first one, like, like you were just saying, Brent, at the end, the like, look what they make you give, flew directly over my head. And even him landing in the water, I feel like I was sort of thinking like, wait, haven't I seen this before? But kind of in like the bad way, because they just shown me part of the other movie in this movie. So like there was a little bit of the confusion that can come from those long periods of separation if you're not a mega fan, but also it makes that more the same, like even more fun, because it's like, but I remember like this thing and I want to go back to see this movie for this thing.
Yeah, if you watch all the Daniel Craig Bond movies in like a series of 4 days, like I watched these movies, they probably would feel there'd be some more of the same happening within those as well.
But also, as we talked about, the best references, you don't know are references if you don't know the thing it's referencing, right? Whether it's a pop culture reference or a reference to a previous movie or whatever. And yeah, same. I didn't remember that those were callbacks when I saw Ultimatum for the first time.
I'm stunned by that. Like, I don't know.
But it didn't matter that I didn't notice, because it's not like it wasn't winking at the camera. It was just Bond's in the water. It was just Bond says a line, you know, and those are the good ways of doing it, where it's
Bourne.
Oh, did I do Bond?
I confused things with my Bond reference.
It's like when we all said Groundhog's Day.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the movies are difficult. Supremacy and Ultimatum are difficult to untangle, not just when you watch them in 2 days, but because, as you're pointing out, Michael, structurally, they are intertangled. Like, the plots are actually mixed together, where this one opens in a scene that probably should have been like a good amount of time that happens theoretically in the past or in the world of Supremacy. And then a lot of stuff happens in between, and we get to this scene in Ultimatum, which is, I think, is fascinating. I can't think of any other examples of a twist of, here's a scene from essentially what is the epilogue of the previous movie. Here it is in this movie being recontextualized within the plot of this movie.
Right.
Weirdly, so I mentioned as what we're watching last episode, Tokyo Vice. Tokyo Vice kind of does the same thing, where the opening scene of Tokyo Vice is clearly like in the future, and then the rest of the season like jumps back, and it's like, how do you get to that? But without spoiling too much, they don't get to that in the first season. And so when it does arrive in the second season, it is this weird like, oh, wait, we already said, okay, that's what you're doing. So weirdly, that's the only thing I've ever seen do that also. And I happened to just mention it.
Like, we're used to, within a single unit, like a single feature film or a single season of a TV show, we were very used to the flash forward thing, you know, but it really breaks our paradigm when it's across movies or across seasons of a TV show. It's like, wait, you don't, how could you possibly know, 4 years in advance or whatever, that this scene will fit into your midpoint or wherever it is in your movie?
Especially if you haven't written the script before you start shooting. It's wild.
And did they know, or did they somehow like retcon a way to make that scene work in this movie just for fun?
I don't know. It's really interesting. But in the last episode too, we were talking about how the continuity of the cast makes these movies feel really cohesive also, where you always have characters that are returning and then always characters that depart. But I do think that, especially with Supremacy and Ultimatum, the fact that you have Nikki here, here's Pamela Landy, here's essentially like the CIA head guy. I can't remember that guy's name. He gets his comeuppance at the end of this, like in about 10 seconds, where they're like, that guy got arrested. And you're like, okay, cool.
Kramer.
Ezra Kramer, thank you. Yeah. But yeah, there does feel like this weird, it's hard to untangle Supremacy and Ultimatum from each other. And not that the movies don't feel tight and of a piece on their own, but I think it's an interesting choice not to do any kind of time jump, right? That's the thing about Supremacy, is that we come in, 2 years have passed. Bourne and Marie are living in India. There's we understand that there's a lot that has happened to the characters that we haven't seen, and we accept that they're in a different place now. And then these movies just don't they do the opposite of trying to do any of that, trying to distinguish themselves in the mind of the viewer. And even the texture of the world feels the same, right? There are some really stunning set pieces in this, like the Tangier set piece, I think. And I actually love the scene with Simon Ross, the Guardian journalist, running around Waterloo Station.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what I think of when I think about Ultimatum, is that whole sequence, plus the Tangier scene. But it is there's nothing that immediately signals to me when I think about that scene. I don't immediately go, oh, Ultimatum, or oh, Supremacy. I just go oh, those are the Bourne sequels. Those are good movies. They kind of are just together in my brain.
Yeah, well, and so I want to talk about all of these sequences. But before we do, I think something that is different in this one that stood out to me is how the movies feel about the government agency the Bourne worked for. And watching all of them back to back to back, it's interesting seeing that evolution happen. I think it's necessary to call out. Right. Yes, exactly. Where like the first one came out in 2002, so shortly after 9/11.
But it was shot in 2001.
Right. And this one coming out in 2007, right? So a lot things evolved, the world evolved over that period of time, and the surveillance aspect of it is very front and center here, to the point where they have their agents, they have a little screen, they have a little camera on their gun, so you can watch the people. It makes no sense that you would have that, but there's like cameras everywhere. That whole sequence in the Waterloo station is like all about surveillance and cameras and that kind of thing. And then Pamela Landy's character, I feel like her arc kind of then dovetails into that kind of thematic statement, where like at the end, her whole thing is like, I think Bourne asks, "Why are you helping me?" And she's like, "This isn't us. We've gone too far. This is not what I signed up for." And so it's just interesting to see that arc happen over time and see it land so prominently and decidedly in this movie of like, there are things that are too far, like the government, black ops, all that stuff. Some things are not, the ends don't justify the means. And so it's just interesting that this film series kind of ends with that statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, while watching this one, I wrote down, this feels like the most war on terror Bourne movie. And the other ones are getting into just corruption or individuals like the Brian Cox character who's just trying to cover his own ass. But this feels
because he was
more,
just stealing money. Like it wasn't political what he was doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas this feels more like a critique of the surveillance state and the power these organizations hold to, basically unilaterally assassinate, choose who lives or dies. And yeah, it feels, this is 2007 at the end of the Bush years, and it felt like we had finally landed in like, oh yes, this is a Bush era movie.
And it's interesting that other action franchises around this time, I'm thinking about Bond in particular, also kind of dealt with this, right? Where there's like oversight and people are starting to like crack down. The Mission Impossible series had some of this too, where there's like the agents have kind of a complex relationship with their superiors and the agency that they work for. But like the other franchises, like Mission Impossible and Bond in particular, just kind of then like forget about it. Like it feels like those movies are much softer toward the agencies themselves. Like, I mean, if we really had wanted to get into it, Mission Impossible 3, I think is like a really interesting one about like how Lawrence Fishburne's character is in, and then, Billy Crudup's character are different faces of that agency, and they, whatever. But I feel like ultimately the franchise is not about that. Like that's kind of a sort of tertiary thing over here to like who the character of Ethan Hunt is, or whatever woman Bond is trying to protect, or whatever bad guy Bond is trying to deal with. The relationship that they have, those agents have with their governments, does not feel at all like a critique. It just feels kind of like sometimes a plot engine, sometimes a timely plot device, like something like salient, sometimes a little bit sharply observed, but definitely not the actual text of like, this is what the character is about. This is what the movies are about. And I think that that's like, for me, this movie, I just respect it for that reason. And the series, I respect it for that reason, because it maintains the focus that was started in the first movie, and even sharpens that focus on like, who is the CIA really in this movie? And what does that say about who we are, and the choices that we've made as a country in terms of foreign policy, and also like surveilling our own, people. And so I think that all of that is just really sharp.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us a little into the theme here of the third movie, which is, if the first one is identity essentially, and who are you, and then the second is making peace with your past, or at least accepting it and coming to terms with it and everything. Then this movie is about closure, almost maybe making amends, but definitely like closure is the word that kept coming to mind. And it's interesting that we have the Nikki, the couple lines, of just like, it was difficult with you and you don't remember everything, because it feels like it's a closure for her, even though it's so subtextual what's going on. And why you guys get?
I felt no closure. I was like, whoa, what does
Tell
that
me more.
mean?
Well, closure as by which I mean, like, I think that my headcanon at least is that she is kind of coming to terms with the fact that the Bourne that she knew is gone, essentially, and this is a brand new clean slate, right? And even though that's so subtextual and it's so kind of headcanon type stuff,
It's almost like, sorry, just because we're here, the
Yeah.
most Nikki thing of like,
Right.
there's not a whole lot on the page, but Julia Stiles does a lot with it. And like that line, it's just that line. And then there's like a lot of staring back and forth
Yeah.
where it's just like it was almost comical of like, now you decide what they're thinking, audience. But it
very past lives.
Yeah.
But it totally worked. Anyway, so just the interesting striking moment that they do a lot
I
with.
want to I glossed over that because I figured we would get more into it later. But yeah, I made a note. Julia Stiles is like the opposite of Franca Potente, where Franca Potente, we were talking about how she's just so, her emotions are just right there, and she can just like blast into them in a way that feels so visceral. And Julia Stiles is so straight and so, whatever, but you feel so much going on beneath the surface. But she is just so, like, even just like Julia Stiles' actual voice and delivery, right? There's something just very kind of monotone there. But like, what's cool about her performance is that that there's so much going on beneath the surface. To wrap up the closure thing, to bring closure to the closure. But then obviously, like, the big finale of this movie is like, Bourne is done being Bourne. Bourne is his goal is to actually out the, Blackbriar and actually put an end to all this. So what does that say about the government agency and, everything you guys were just talking about? But then also, what does it say about Bourne's journey? It's like, why it feels like there shouldn't be another Bourne movie is because it's just like, yes, this is it. This is the thing you've been trying to do for 2 movies, and you did it. You succeeded. Great. We're done. Story over. The end.
It's interesting. One of the patterns that became evident in the third movie. It's like, it's a thing where it's when something happens 3 times, it's now a pattern. Is the use of a single monumental flashback hazy thing per movie. So in the first movie, it's the assassination attempt on that African leader that went wrong. In the second movie, it's the assassination of the Russian politician and his wife. And in this movie, it's kind of this origin horror story of how Bourne became Bourne and how he was coerced or tortured into becoming a weapon. And so that was interesting. Also, that I think was part of why I wrote down this feels so Bush era War on Terror, because it had that Abu Ghraib like waterboarding kind of torture vibes as well. And the government engaging in these kinds of activities that we think of as beneath us.
Yeah. And it is always difficult with those flashbacks. Like at least in the Bourne Identity, we get to see that he chooses not to assassinate Wombosi. But then the other 2, we know that he killed Nesky and his wife. And then in this one, we see him kill just somebody, right? Who's tied up and defenseless because it's like a test, essentially. And it is always like it's to the movie's credit that we are so invested in Bourne, and they've placed us so squarely with him, in protagonist brain, like that it's hard to watch him understand something else, yet again, something else that he has done. And regardless of like, I think that, it's a very pointed commentary on, obviously, they like psychologically broke him to get him to do this thing. And they they took away his literal name. They, all the various like methods that both Nikki details like at other times. And then also the ones that we see actually in the flashback. But yeah, it's difficult to see that happen to Bourne, but also it's difficult to see him like commit that act. And so I think that, again, there's something raw and unflinching about these movies and the way that they look at assassins and all these other like the weapons of war that are also the personnel and the people and the soldiers. And so I think that is like, it's not a war movie per se, but it does take a very hard look at that. And because we are so with Bourne as a protagonist, we want our protagonists to be good guys. And we like it when we see Bourne decide not to kill people. But he also kills some people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in some ways, I can feel this franchise's influence on the Craig Bond movies in the sense that those get into the psychological toll of this work in a way that we're going to talk about GoldenEye soon. The Brosnan movies, he's having a ball. There's no psychological damage here. This is a great time assassinating people and killing hundreds. It's real fun.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and I feel like the filmmaking just elevates all of that. Like there's a kind of, I don't even want to say lazy, but just like a conventional, like you could paint by the numbers way to execute a lot of this, especially the ending. And I feel like what I appreciated this time around with both Supremacy and this movie, especially as it got to the end, was that there's like real care happening in the filmmaking. Like some movies you can tell, especially action movies, you can tell that it's like, well, the director's here to like shoot cool action stuff. And then people go blah, 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 blah in between the action. And like, that's all, the focus is on the action. But when the action stops and it's time to do that whole sequence with Albert Finney, like there's real like filmmaking, care, direction happening. The moment that like really stood out to me is like once we're kind of in the flashback, Bourne's asking like, who is he? And Albert Finney's like, you don't need to know. What did he do? It doesn't matter. And then you reveal that the person is in the room with him. Like just something about the staging and the revelations of information make that just like stretch out the tension so much and like pulled me anyway into the psychology of Bourne in that moment. And I feel like that's true in those drama scenes, but also in the action fun sequences like we've talked about. There's the Waterloo Station sequence, I feel like has now like become iconic. Like I feel like that's the bar, like set the bar for I gotta navigate this person through the crowd while people are chasing. Like just so well done. Again, thinking about the choreography of how do you shoot all this, how do you plan all of this. You're like seeing it from all these different angles. Like it's just so much fun. The Tangier sequence, which I do want to talk about, a lot of it feels like a little too chaotic for me. Like some of the fight stuff, kind of like in Supremacy, the hand-to-hand stuff passes the bar a little bit for me of like, this is essentially intelligible and I can't tell what's happening except like punches are happening. But there are also other moments that are super iconic, like Bourne jumping through the window as the camera, like that's one of the coolest shots. Yeah.
So iconic they used it again in Jurassic World Dominion.
Yeah, exactly. So does that, and even like there was a twist in the car chase moment, right? Where Bourne is chasing the bad guy. We see the bad guy sees the Bourne is chasing him, but doesn't do anything obvious. And then there's that switcheroo where like Bourne turns the corner. He sees the bad guy put the bag down next to a car, and Bourne thinks, oh no, there's a bomb. He's going to blow up that car. And then realizes that the bad guy knew Bourne was there and dropped a different bag. And then boom, like that was just all done really well. And again, that you could just do a paint by numbers version of that wouldn't have the same impact. But like the direction is really trying to pull you into the drama of every beat and turn in these sequences, which is I love to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I made a note. I was thinking on a meta level about Yeah, I think when we talked about No Time to Die, we talked about like what's the checklist if you are doing a movie in a franchise, right? And it's like, oh, okay, it's a Bond movie, so it's got to have this and this and this, right? And then now Bourne, it's similar thing as Alex was saying, it's the third one, so like now we're establishing these patterns. But what I appreciated was these movies. It's not a copy and paste formula thing. I think we had a lot of sequels in the 80s and 90s where it felt like we're just going to take the exact same plot from the first movie, but now they're in Africa, or now like it's this villain, or now it's this twist or whatever, right? But it's like you know exactly when every beat is going to happen because they're literally just being like, they worked the first time, let's do it again. And that's not what these movies feel like. And kind of to your point, it's like we are going to have the close-up fight sequence. We are going to have a car or a vehicle in a tiny street kind of thing. We are going to have a sort of like exciting spy scene where who's where and what's going on. But you don't know when they're going to happen. You don't know the context. You don't know all that kind of stuff, right? You don't know who's going to be involved. And I love that. I love the sort of like the care for the franchise to make sure that those things are checked, even if they don't feel like people are going to be mad walking out of the theater if they didn't get a car chat, whatever, but at the same time doing it in a way that continually feels fresh. Yeah.
And I think there's an argument to be made here that there is an awareness and like almost a self-referential thing happening where elements are being remixed, but there are purposeful echoes like in this movie of the previous two movies. Mm-hmm. And to an extent to which I think it is kind of the point in some ways, right? Like there's this cyclical nature to it where Bourne is stuck on this carousel and he's trying to get off. Like he wants to break this cycle. And so the things that happen to him over and over again are being visually referenced in the filmmaking, as you're pointing out, Michael. But also there's kind of, I think, purposefulness in the way that scenes are being like repeated or reconstructed, albeit slightly differently. So when he gets into that car wreck at the end and the guy is leaning against the steering wheel bleeding in the same way that the assassin was at the end of Supremacy, and Bourne walks up to the car with a gun in his hand, that is purposeful. Like you can't tell me that that's not a purposeful reference to the climactic end of the previous, car chase scene, because the shots are almost exactly the same. The situation is almost exactly the same. Similarly, the sequence with Nikki having to like change, like dye her hair, cut her hair, like, and then, there's tension there. It's all like, this is the life that Bourne is trapped in, and he's trying to get out of this life. The whole movie is about him trying to get out of this situation that he's in. I think you can even go so far as to argue, like there are archetypes, right? Like the David Strathairn character. Is that how we say his name? Sure. I've never known.
Strathairn?
No, no one will ever know
either. Yeah.
Great. No one can. No one can know. Anyway, his character in this movie feels like this Chris Cooper, like, archetype or echo, right? And I just feel like they're so, I don't know, it goes beyond homage. It goes back to the fabric of the construction of the movies. And again, this movie leaning hard into, I have to end this because otherwise it just keeps going. That part of Bourne's journey.
Thinking about individual sequences in these movies, and I think we've used the terms either fatigued or not fatigued, and when we say fatigued, for me in an action movie, that's when it feels like story has stopped happening, or there's no reversals anymore, there's no turns, there's just kind of forward momentum of the same thing, and it's not that in and of itself gets boring after a while, no matter how shaky or edity or fast it is. But I think why the scenes, especially in the second two Bourne movies, rarely feel that way to me is that there are these constant reversals. And so I think about the Tangier sequence, maybe once they're jumping over rooftops, that kind of goes on for, overstates its welcome a little bit, but it's cool. But before that, there's these great reversals where at first, they're there because they're trying to prevent the assassination of somebody from Blackbriar, who actually wants to come clean about the program. And then, as Michael, as you pointed out, there's that twist where, bomb's actually behind him, blows up that guy. This guy is now aware that Nikki, was actually not on his side. The assassin gets the new kill order, and so then Nikki, who just was the person handing off a phone to him, is now realizing he's coming for her. And so you just have these constant reversals that even if the sequence, is shot in a way that isn't my favorite or is cut in a way that isn't my favorite, it doesn't really matter because I'm here for the reversals and they just keep coming. And same thing in the Guardian reporter sequence. It feels like there's a constant escalation in that sequence where there's just new problems, new obstacles very rapidly. No one solution to the problem lasts very long before a new, more difficult problem arises.
And one thing that these movies are all masterful at, but especially this one, is basically making us lean forward and wonder what Bourne's plan is, because Bourne clearly has a plan. Even if it's a plan that's only a split second in advance, but he's ahead of us. He's always ahead of us. He's always ahead of everybody in a lot of ways. And that's always fun. So in the Waterloo sequence where he has buys a prepaid phone and then he tells Simon Ross to walk up to the guy in the blue hoodie and turn around and face around, because I don't know what that means, but Bourne knows that they're going to think that guy was his accomplice, and then go over here and do this thing. In the Tangier sequence, the one that always gets me is Bourne's grabbing towels off the clotheslines, right? And swinging them and wrapping them around his hands. I don't know there's glass coming, but Bourne knows that. And it's just those things make us lean forward. What's he going to do with the towels? What could that possibly mean?
What's he going to do with that aerosol can?
Right. He has a plan. He has a plan. And I just think that that's one of the best things about the character is that, and the way that these action sequences are envisioned and shot, is that there's always some implication that even in Supremacy, where he is in the grocery store at the very end after he's been shot, and he grabs vodka and dish towels, and it's I assume you need vodka and dish towels for some reason. Oh, it's because you were shot, obviously, but it's watching him then do something with them answers a small but interesting dramatic question that explains his actions from before. And all these sequences just have tons of moments like that dropped into them.
Let's bring up something interesting in that, as we've talked about, the Craig Bonds kind of borrow from this. I feel lots of things start to borrow from this kind of not ruthless, but kind of ruthless efficiency that Bourne has. But other movies like 007 is still a hero at the end of the day. There's still going to be a moment where it goes, and he turns and shoots, and it's yeah, you killed that guy. And Bourne at no point is treated like a hero, which is really interesting. But he does heroic things. They're just so not showy. So like you were just talking about Brian and Trisha, the little, what's it called, the can.
Aerosol,
right, where he grabs it. What's he going to do with it? He puts it in a grill. Oh God, that's going to explode. Is that going to hurt people? No, because Bourne is already escorting the man standing next to the grill away, and then it blows up, and then Bourne's just on to the next thing.
And that's it's 6 seconds of screen time or something like that. It's so fast.
It's 6 frames of screen time. Yeah. It goes really fast.
Which is so satisfying. He's so efficient. It's efficiency porn.
Totally.
The CIA too. The whole thing's efficiency porn. Everybody's so on the nose.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting. Yeah, another aspect of how the filmmaking is reflecting the character, because you were saying, Trisha, Bourne kills people. He's an assassin. He has a horrific past, one might say, and has done these terrible things. So he's not positioned as a hero, but he's still making the choices that a protagonist needs to make to keep us on board with him, and doing it in a very cool way at the same time. So it's just an interesting mixture of a lot of things.
The scene where he takes out those 6 guys in the stairwell, it's in the Waterloo sequence, right? But it's they're somewhere, behind all the shops or whatever. And he's protecting Simon Ross, and he just takes out 6 guys, but doesn't kill any of them, right? Like, they all have guns. They all come for him in a stairwell. He just takes them all out. And then, of course, gets caught on the cameras. But, like, that scene is exactly, like, what we need from Bourne, right? Like, this is what we come to Bourne for. He's not going to kill anybody. He's here to and he wouldn't take these guys on if he didn't have to. He's here to protect Simon Ross, the journalist. And, like, but just the efficiency, as you're saying, Alex, and then, like, absolutely one step ahead of everybody and so quick.
Before we get into lessons, I watched this movie this afternoon and then looked at the time and went, God damn it, I'll do it. And I watched Jason Bourne again.
Whoa.
So I have a report.
You sound so deflated.
It's like a reanimated corpse where you're like, it looks like Bourne, it sounds like Bourne, it shakes like Bourne, but I don't think he's in there. I don't think the soul is in there, right? Like, it just feels like it's just walking around. There is actually zero levity in the entire movie. Like, no one ever smiles, including me. Like, it is just, there's no, it's not fun. It's fun only in the sense that, like, action scenes are fun, right? But it's never fun in the way the first 3 movies and Bourne Legacy are fun, where it's like, ooh, like, they did a thing and they thought that, and, like, that person's confused now, and, like, oh, he got the thing. It's just Bourne frowning and punching and not speaking. I said he has 65 lines. He has 45 lines in this movie. There are scenes that aren't about Bourne, and, like, there are scenes where Bourne is on screen a lot and just not saying things. That's fine. Like, that's still storytelling, right? And if Nikki is the lightsaber that the movie gently hands us at the top of the hill, the trilogy, this movie just takes it and chucks it off the cliff.
I will never forgive that.
Does not care.
Did they kill her or
so early?
So early,
just
so unceremoniously.
Yep,
I'm furious.
It sucks. And no Pam Landy. It's not there.
All the best things are
all the best
and then
things.
Alicia Vikander is there, but then, like, she does the same thing that everyone else has already done. She does the Pam Landy thing. She does the Nikki thing of, like, you know what? Maybe you're handsome, so I'm gonna, like, not be an agent. But like, it feels like an okayest hits compilation from the trilogy. It's like, we're talking about, like, Trisha, you were saying, these scenes that are purposefully in conversation with the scenes from the original. This movie is just full of, like, oh yeah, we just did that again. Like, you planted a cell phone in someone's pocket. We did that. We just did it again. You know, like, it just feels like a bunch of stuff that was already done again. So the whole movie just feels unnecessary. The story is interesting. It's about, like, him figuring out who his father was and finding out that his father was actually involved in like,
I forgot about that.
On paper, it's like, okay, if you have to tell another chapter of the story, okay, there are some smart things that are being done here, but it is just a miserable movie. The end's in Vegas, which feels feels like a Con Air car
Never
chase.
has ever.
Yeah,
Jason Bourne set foot in Vegas.
It's very strange.
Go back to Europe. Yeah,
exactly. So, you know, if you showed 5 minutes of this movie to anybody, they'd probably be like, that looks fine, or that looks really good, right? Because it's well directed, things are well done, but it just feels like such a, I don't know, a moist fart of a movie, like, when you actually watch the whole thing, which I have now done twice and will never do again.
I shall live with the happy feelings of the original trilogy and not taint them.
I want you to think about Nikki's little tiny smile when she's watching the news report at the end of this, and then the cut to the body floating in the water, and then it starts to swim away, and then Moby.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Franchise.
End there.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we do what Jason Bourne apparently didn't do and talk about what lessons we're going to take away from the Bourne Ultimatum. Alex, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Something I think about also in action scenes, why do we zone out? Why do they get boring? If you have an invincible hero who can't be hurt or honestly, Jason Bourne is so good at his job, so good at what he does. I think there is a risk of things potentially becoming uninteresting if it's just like you're an invincible assassin. One, Bourne does get hurt and does screw up sometimes. But two, these movies are really good at also putting other people in danger that we care about or that are critical to the mission. And so I just think that's a really smart just lesson for any kind of spy thriller action movie. If you've got a hero who's like hyper competent and we pretty much know is going to prevail in a fight most of the time, it really ups the stakes to have a Nikki or a Simon Ross from The Guardian as the actual focal point for a thrilling sequence. They are expendable. They can get hurt. They can die. We know Bourne can't die at this point in the movie. We know Bond can't die at this point in the movie. But having somebody else who is not that hyper competent secret agent as the center of a sequence really makes it more interesting. And so, yeah, I think it's really smart that the two big set pieces we think about in this movie, the Tangier sequence and the Waterloo sequence, you know, Bourne is not the primary like object of the antagonism. They're actually going after somebody else, and Bourne is having to use all their skills to protect that person or get there first. And that just makes for a much more interesting sequence because we don't know what's going to happen. Whereas, once again, I'll forever complain about my bouncy Marvel movies. I know Captain America and Iron Man are going to punch each other, and then they're going to stop punching each other at some point. But I don't know what's going to happen to this Guardian reporter. I don't know what's going to happen to Nikki. And therefore, I'm on the edge of my seat all the way through the end of that sequence.
Speaking of Daniel Bruhl,
Yep.
Civil War, surprise.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Surprise Daniel Bruhl.
Surprise
Scene
Daniel
for
Bruhl.
them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really smart in this movie that Simon Ross does not make it out of that Waterloo sequence.
Right.
Because again, it creates real stakes for the Nikki sequence later. Like, if we see that Bourne has failed to protect Simon Ross earlier in the movie, then we truly are on the edge of our seat about Nikki. And like, I think it's really, I don't know, it's just cleverly done because we start to genuinely care about the Simon Ross character. Like, he's
Right.
introduced pretty early on. We see him talking to his editor, and like we see that he really is trying to get at the truth of something. And you know, he is a very earnest reporter who like is trying to do the right thing and expose the corruption in the way that he can, right? He's trying to help Bourne essentially at the end of the day, or do the thing that Bourne wishes he could do. And it takes the entire sequence, but eventually the sniper gets him, and it just creates high stakes for the rest of the movie because we've spent some time with that character. He's not just somebody who walked in and immediately like walked back out or was shot. We started to really care.
This other kind of mini lesson right there is, you know, if you're going to kill off characters in your movie to achieve this goal of, stakes are high in any sequence that follows, because these are the rules of the game, it's also helpful to set up that character who dies early on in the film as seemingly a main character in the film. Like he could be a new Pam Landy. We don't know. Like he seems like he could be a new player in the Bourne, you know, series as this kind of reporter angle who's trying to uncover the CIA from that perspective. And the fact that they don't just set him up as like a random person in this sequence, but like as seemingly a main character in this movie also adds to that, oh God, anything could happen.
Yeah.
But he's so bad at following directions. Like,
He really is.
by the time he dies, I'm like, you deserve
Yeah.
it.
When he
I'm
like
sorry,
runs for
sir.
it, I'm like, listen to the guy who's been protecting you this whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
They do the same thing in Jason Bourne.
Oh,
They just do it again.
wow.
Yep.
That's okay. Trisha, what lesson are you going to take away from the Bourne Ultimatum?
The main lesson that I have here is about nuance and restraint. And we've talked about these things before, but I just think that they're on full display here. Mainly in that this movie and these films generally could be much more familiar and expected in the way that they create the Bourne character and fill in his backstory. Like, I talked about it on the first episode where we were talking about his relationship with Marie, how it could be much more like overtly romantic and like, you know, yeah, just something we've seen before. Here's a romantic lead and they love each other and it's romantic. And then there's a sexual relationship and then they run away together in the end and they kiss in the last frame of the movie. And that's the happy ending of that. And that movie doesn't do any of that. Like it is very nuanced and very restrained. And this movie does that too. Like the Nikki character is the prime example. But even like the Landy character, there's room for questions about what she cares about, who she is, why is she helping Bourne, what does she believe in, and they could talk a lot more about that, right? Like you could see a scene where Landy is like, well, when I first signed up, I really believed in this, and here's why, because I grew up in this kind of family, and like you could see in a worse movie like an over explanation of who Landy is and her ideals. And you could see a bunch more flashbacks about like Bourne feeling bad about something and all of this stuff. And the movie, like at every opportunity, tells us as little as possible. And what it tells us is way more interesting, or they hold back way more than they give. And I just think that's a good rule of thumb, and it elevates these movies. It makes us lean forward and want to know. Now, it's a tightrope, because if you don't tell us anything, then we're just like, well, you're not going to tell us anything. But I just think it's really well done. They kind of walk that edge really well.
Yeah, you had mentioned, I don't know, dozens of episodes ago, for some reason, something we were talking about, the line, it was difficult with you. From this
it was
movie.
difficult for me with you.
Yeah, difficult for me with you.
It's like 7 words long or whatever that is. It's
and you were like, I can't remember which movie it's from. And I was like, oh, it's from Ultimatum. Like, I just immediately was like, I know what movie it's from. I know the scene. I know the line because it makes you lean forward, you know? And it's just like I remember the first, the ending of all three of these movies, right? Like there are those moments that are just like, they stick in your head because they're just so good. All right, now I'm going to say some more about Jason Bourne, but I won't. The ending tries to do a little gag, and it's like still so just. Blah. But yeah, like I love those moments. I love those little. What does that mean? All you gave me was this little thing, and it just. There are reasons why we talk about movies decades later, because they didn't quite give us an answer about something, but they gave us just enough to chew on that we're thinking about it forever.
I love the last few moments between Bourne and Nikki too, where she's getting on the bus and like in another movie, she like throws herself into his arms and like there's a big romantic something or just like some kind of deeply meaningful phrase or whatever. And instead she just gets on the bus and he says, it gets easier. And that's it. Yep. And it's restrained and it's nuanced because we know that there's a backstory there that we don't know all of the shades of meaning of. And then we, kind of close with Nikki watching the news report, and it's perfect.
It just reminded me of the cold open to Casino Royale, the black and white sequence, where the guy that Bond is there to kill realizes that he's killed one person and he still has to do two, and he goes, the second is, and then Bond kills him and goes, yes, considerably, and it's just like, I just love those things where it's like, here's the fewest words possible that you need to understand everything that's going on here.
Yeah. My lesson is kind of directly in line with this. I was thinking about this kind of same thing, but from a directorial point of view, where as I talked about the ending of this movie, I was transfixed. Like, surprisingly so. I'm still like thinking about it. And it's just like something in the revealing of information, visually, sonically, etc., pulls me in. And so, I think it's easy to forget that that's part of what telling a story means. Like, you can get a script and figure out, here's how you show all this to the audience in a linear way so that at the end of the scene, they've gotten everything that they need and we can move on. But I really like it when I can tell the storytellers like, but how do we make you feel this? How do we pull the audience into this like headspace? Like, how do you make this scene entertaining and interesting and all these things? And so it's making me almost want to just like, I don't know, with every scene I work on, just like write out, here's all the information that needs to be conveyed by the end of the scene. What is the minimum the audience needs to be invested at any given moment? And can we hold everything else back in some way or another? So like I said earlier, Bourne's in a room talking to Albert Finney about like, what did he do? And like, you know, he's asking his questions. And so we're getting like, okay, so this guy wants Bourne to do something with somebody. And that's enough for me to be like, okay, what's Bourne going to do? And then it reveals, oh, the person's in the room. There's a bag over it. Like, this person wants Bourne to kill him right here. Like, that is information that could have been there at the beginning. Like in the script, it might have even said, like, these 3 people are in a room. But how you shoot it, how you reveal that information to the audience makes each step that much better. And so just a good reminder to be diligent and don't get lazy. Like, writing a scene and getting all the information across is hard enough, but like, keep going and find the most delicious way to tell that story to your audience. That's my lesson.
Yes.
Also,
that's a good lesson.
Shout out to Tom Gallup, my boy, Tom.
Michael has been sending us videos for the past week of the guy who opens doors to tell someone that they're needed in another room.
It's just like, he does it so much. Like, that's just like his whole thing. Like, I feel like the actor on set must have been like, oh, another door, huh? All right, yeah, maybe I'll come in this way, or like I'll go a little bit further in this time. This is big. I can't cross the threshold for this one. Anyway, it's just so fascinating to me how many times in this series this actor comes in to tell Landy something. Like, his whole job is to enter and be like, the screenwriter sent me in with some exposition. You got to come listen to this. And he makes it fun every time. So shout out to you, Tom Gallup.
Every Pam Landy kind of archetype in this thing like needs that person.
Oh, totally.
I'm sure. Like, I think about the seasons of 24. You know, it's the same kind of dynamics in whatever counterterrorism office you're in. You've got the kind of boss person who's really, you know, kind of walking around shouting orders, doing the efficiency porn, but they always have like the right hand person who's opening the door and letting them know like somebody just came in. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of like a staple of the genre somehow.
And I feel like there's nuance in this where like it's not that he's like, you know, incapable, or like he's like, what do we do? Right. Like, I just like, we just heard like
they have like a relationship, like they're good coworkers.
There's like a story there, and there's competence, but also like you're the one with the, I don't know. Anyway, I was fascinated by.
I'm gonna write a movie about this guy.
I'm gonna write to Tom Gallup and say, Michael
your
just
biggest
talks about you on the podcast more than anyone ever talked about your character.
Yeah, ultimate appreciation for the things that, you know, go unnoticed sometimes. Mm-hmm. Brian, what's your lesson for the Bourne Ultimatum?
Yeah, you know, on the first episode, I talked about just having a clear goal for the protagonist and how much that helps me personally. And I'm realizing the sort of flip side of that coin, because I was also talking then about like the people in rooms talking. Like, when does that make me glaze over, and when does that make me actually care or lean forward, or at least be feel like oriented? And I just realized that it has so much to do with just a focal point that everything is orbiting around. And in the Bourne trilogy, it's Bourne. Like 99% of scenes are about what Bourne is up to and where he is, where he's going, what the thing he just did or is trying to do, what effect that had on the story world, on, you know, Treadstone, on Blackbriar, on the CIA, whatever it is. There, you know, in Jason Bourne, there are scenes with like Riz Ahmed and Tommy Lee Jones, the duo that everyone, you know, has been waiting for. Riz Ahmed's like a tech bro, like a Zuckerberg character, but like there are scenes that just have nothing to do with Bourne, and it's like, and then there are scenes that there's like Bourne hasn't been on screen for 10 minutes. And there's like a couple of those in this trilogy, but for the most part, it's just here is the focal character, and everything is revolving around them. In Talented Mr. Ripley, it's Dickie. Even for the second half of that movie, it's all about who is in Dickie's orbit. What does that mean? Where are we going? How do we relate to this character, right? And I feel like it's a very screenwriting 101 thing to say, like introduce a bunch of characters with different perspectives and then unleash a central conflict onto them and see how they deal with it, right? Jurassic Park or Independence Day or whatever, right? Just like a very clear, like nobody is having a side story over here because this thing that is this central conflict like is affecting everyone immediately, and it's like a peak urgency. But I'm realizing that maybe the reason I struggle with especially like this sort of political thriller and war genre is that there often isn't a central focal point. Like there are several there's like a B plot and a C plot that are over here. So it starts to feel meandery because I'm like, wait, what's the actual main thing we're worried about? And why aren't you worried about that main thing over there? Or the focal point is really esoteric. It's like, let's make sure that we don't have political unrest with this other country. It's like, okay, but what does that mean? What does that look like? How does that actually, like, how can I sink my teeth into that, right? And of course we've talked about like Apocalypse Now or Saving Private Ryan. It's just like, and then this brings us back to the clear goal where it's just like everything that we are going to be talking about is based on this one thing that the entire story is kind of orbiting around. So yeah, make sure your central conflict is clear and make sure as much of your script as possible is focused on that. And then guess what? Theme comes from there because it's all in conversation with that. And that's when those B and C plots that aren't actually connected to the A plot start to feel meandery, is because they're either not doing theme work or they just feel separated or whatever. And it's like when you just have one central thing that everyone is talking about, it makes it really clear for the audience to know what's going on. And it also makes it really clear, it makes it really easy to do as much theme work as you want to do in your movie, because everyone can be having a conversation about the same thing, but different ways, in different ways.
Yeah. When withholding the information from your audience, what your movie is about should not be one of those things.
No.
Definitely make sure
right, exactly.
that is super clear. And then once, like you're saying, once you have that and that's clear, you can play and have fun telling the story in all those different ways. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to hear what you guys have been watching recently. But before we do that, a reminder for people who were not at the Patreon live stream recording of GoldenEye, which happened in the past for you, listener, but in the future for us, we haven't done it, but we will. And once we have, we can edit it and then release it to you next Friday. So if you weren't at the Patreon live recording, you can look for the episode this next Friday.
The question's not where are we, but when are we?
When are we? And why are we? And what have you been watching recently, Trisha?
Perfectly done. I saw, and I don't know why, it was just kind of like on my list of 90s thrillers that I wanted to get to. I saw this movie Copycat from 1995, starring Sigourney Weaver, Holly Hunter, Dermot Mulroney, and a variety of other people, including Harry Connick Jr. and a lot of other folks. And it is very interesting. It's like Sigourney Weaver plays a psychologist who studies serial killers, and then she ends up being targeted by a serial killer. And she's so anxious about this fact that she basically becomes like agoraphobic and can't leave her apartment. And so she starts helping Holly Hunter and Dermot Mulroney try to solve the crime, but like from her apartment. And the killer, I don't want to give too much away, but anyway, the killer's MO is like very recognizable to Sigourney Weaver's character in particular. So anyway, it's, if you like true crime stuff, it's sort of like pre-true crime mania, like true crime fan stuff, because there's a lot of talk about real life serial killers in it. and like serial killer psychology and what have you. Sigourney Weaver's excellent, as you would imagine. Holly Hunter is really Holly Huntering it. Her character's really interesting. Anyway, I really, really liked it. It's pretty bumpy. It gets even bumpier as it goes along. It isn't very well reviewed movie, but it scratched a lot of my personal itches. So I recommend Copycat from 1995.
Nice. Okay, cool. Alex, what have you been watching recently?
So I'm going to also do some time shifting here and project into the future, because I was like, why isn't Joan Allen in more things? And I want to see Joan Allen.
She is.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I don't see her in like the Pam Landy role enough, I guess. Like more like, I guess, yeah, what else has she been in recently like that? Because she's so good at that. And then I looked at her IMDb, and an upcoming project is a TV miniseries called 0 Day, where she plays a former first lady and nominee to the federal bench whose professional ambitions take backseat to her husband's political career, played by Robert De Niro. Also starring Jesse Plemons, Lizzie Kaplan, Angela Bassett, Matthew Modine. And it's about a global cyber attack. So I'm like, we may be getting some Pam Landy.
This is what you will be watching?
Yeah.
That's what I will be watching when it comes out on Netflix.
Is the internet.
Is what he will be watching.
Yeah. Basically, I want more Pam Landy, and apparently there is a political thriller coming out where she's starring as a political person during a global cyber attack.
Nice.
I'm very excited.
Face Off, baby.
Yeah.
Pleasant
Also,
film.
You want a
Also.
To see her face off against a character named Noah in another movie, I recommend The Notebook.
There you go. I recommend The Crucible, which is one of my favorite Joan Allen movies.
All right. Brian, what have you been watching recently?
Just been Google image searching Joan Allen. Is that weird? So I mentioned last week that I rewatched the Planet of the Apes trilogy, the obviously the reboot trilogy. And it's unfortunate timing because since Alex needs to Bourne style go tool around Europe for a couple weeks. We're recording this ahead of time.
Quite in the Bourne style.
I mean, who knows? We'll see what happens.
We'll see.
I'm going to pass through Madrid, so we'll see what happens.
But yeah, so this will have come out weeks after.
I'm just picturing Alex getting one of those like canisters and trying to throw it in and trying to tackle someone, but like everybody falls down. Anyway,
just bounces off the grill and hits him in the face.
I am the Guardian reporter not following orders properly. That's what I am in the movie.
Sorry, Brian.
No, it's good. But yes, when this episode comes out, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes will have already been in theaters for a couple weeks. But as of recording, I've not seen it yet. I'm seeing it tomorrow night. So it's unfortunate timing, but I wanted to talk about it specifically while we're talking about the Bourne trilogy, because of the sort of sequel thing. The first movie is a prequel, and it does a lot of like, here's kind of how the story world that you know from the original movie started, and here's like some of those iconic lines, and here's like some character names, because it sort of does a remix thing where it's just like, here's a character name from the original movie. It's not that character, but like we use their name. It's kind of like bringing in a bunch of elements. And the first one is like a little choppy, but it has so much heart, and I love it so much. And then the second one, as I mentioned last time, is like it's that T2 Dark Knight where it's like, what if we just boom, like upped the scope, upped the quality, upped everything, just like so ambitious and so well done. And then the third one is what I want to talk about now, which it's such a backpedal from the first two. It's like the scope is smaller. It's not trying to do, like, say what you will about Dark Knight Rises, it is very clearly trying to be a step up, right? It's trying to be like, how can we get bigger? How can we get right? And that may not have been the right choice, but it was trying. So yeah, the third movie just feels like it, like you were saying, Alex, like here's the next chapter in like this episode or whatever, right? But it's very clearly the conclusion of a trilogy, so it shouldn't feel like that. It should feel like Bourne Ultimatum feels, of just like we are bringing everything together now. So there's a major thing that happens in the story world that changes the story world. but it was happening anyway, and the plot, the events of the movie have no bearing on that. So it just would have happened anyway. So it's like, that's not helpful, right? And thinking about compared to Bourne, where it's like every chapter in this trilogy is like, Bourne is moving to the next part of the plot, right? Like, this is a 3-act story, and each act has a turning point and a conclusion. And then the protagonist, Caesar, there are major things that happen with him in the third movie, kind of like Nikki and Jason Bourne, where it's just like, let's do this for emotional stuff, and it's like, yeah, but you gotta earn it. You gotta actually do it. It is kind of lazy. So yeah, those don't feel earned. So it's interesting to have been watching these two trilogies kind of back to back, because I feel like the Bourne trilogy is always moving the needle forward, right? It feels like things are, and we talked a little bit about how some of this movie feels a little samey, right? But it still does feel like by the time the movie ends, you feel like, yes, you did the thing. You did what I wanted you to do. And it was really unfortunate to see this movie in the theater, War of the Planet of the Apes in the theater, and then watch it again the other night and just feel like, nope, you're so good with the first two movies. Also, the director of the first movie was different than the director of the second two, so the Bourne thing there too, where it's like kind of the crossover, and screenwriters changed along the way. So yeah, I still love this trilogy, and I do like the third movie, but it is an interesting study in sort of how not to do a sequel, how not to complete a trilogy in a way that Bourne Ultimatum is, I think, succeeds much more at.
So for our listener who keeps track of all of our What Are We Watchings, does that mean for Brian and I, we're both officially having a What Are We Watching from the future?
No, because my What I'm watching is not Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It is Rise, Dawn, and War. And then,
all right.
And then you can hit me up on social media if you want to know my thoughts on Kingdom after 3 weeks ago. To you. Time.
My brain hurts.
Yeah.
But I do want to know, because I'm curious, because I liked the first two and never saw the third. And so I'm curious about this fourth one, and if I can skip the third. Be curious to hear.
I didn't like the third either.
Yeah, you can almost certainly skip the third, because of the fourth takes place, I think, like far in the future from the original, from this trilogy. So,
okay, because it was one. Okay, yeah, because they're starting to anyway.
Because the humans have like devolved more towards.
Right.
Yeah, the original movie.
That's the thing that happens in the third movie that has nothing to do with the events of the third movie. So it's just, that would have just happened anyway. At the end.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I want to talk about a YouTube video, actually. But first, I want to say that I finished the first episode of The Turning Point, which you mentioned last week, Alex. And the first 20 minutes, honestly, for me, were like a little bit like, this is a little flashy and showy, and I don't trust documentaries that are this like flashy and showy. But as it goes on, it gets really in depth, and it's everything you said, and it's really, really great. And my main takeaway is that it further made me upset at Oppenheimer retroactively for not being about more of the things that it was about. And I understand that like it was trying to do its thing, and it did its thing, and that's fine. But what I wanted from it was more of what I saw in The Turning Point, which is all these different perspectives on what it actually meant to drop the bomb, and the Japanese perspective, and what it was like from people on the day. Anyway, all that stuff, which is also all covered in a Veritasium video on Oppenheimer, which is essentially the same story as the movie, but told in 30 minutes in the kind of documentary style, and also gets into some of the nerdier details, which I appreciate. Neither of those things is what am I watching, but
What?
Another video from Veritasium.
What are all of you doing? I just came in here with a movie from 1995. What is happening with you
None
guys?
of us
Trish is like, here's a movie, I
normal.
watched it to the end, and the rest of us were like, I don't know, what is time?
Yeah.
What is this assignment? Like,
Free association.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's
Google
like,
searches.
What did you watch? What will you watch? What could you watch? Anyway, Trish is gone. There's a Veritasium video called Tit for Tat about game theory, specifically about the prisoner's dilemma. And this has to do with the Cold War, because the studying of game theory became very popular during the Cold War when it was sort of like, okay, US has nukes, Russia has nukes. How do you play a game with imperfect information where you have to trust someone, and if you fail, everybody dies, right? And so this video goes into this kind of computer game simulation contest that happened, where basically in the 60s, 70s, maybe it was the 80s, actually. It was the 80s. This computer scientist held this contest where people had to write computer software to play the prisoner's dilemma with each other. So like, can you write a software, an agent to play this game and get the most points? So just selfishly playing this prisoner's dilemma game, how can you get the most points? And prisoner's dilemma obviously is like, there are two people, you can defect and screw over the other person, and if they don't defect, you get extra points, but if they do defect, then neither of you get any points, and if you both cooperate, you both get like a medium amount of points. And so cooperating, if everyone would just always cooperate, that'd be great. Anyway, this video gets into the just the simple mathematics behind cooperation. And if you think about it evolutionarily, why should animals cooperate? Like, if your goal in life is to maximize your experience and pass on your genes, like, why use your energy to take care of somebody else? Like, it's there's cost to you in that. So anyway, this goes into that simulation, what the winning program was, which was tit for tat, and why just like the empirical mathematics behind cooperation and why it's good and how it can work and how it actually is the best strategy, even if you want to be really selfish. And so I just love how this video, it's like 30 minutes long. It's a documentary. It's about sciencey, nerdy stuff, but it's also kind of about like life philosophy things. And that's what I'm realizing is like my sweet spot is when science can back up.
You're just now realizing that?
Yeah.
I kind of could have told you.
Right. I'm late to my own party here.
Michael now feels that cooperation is worth it because science has proven it.
No, it's like, it's cool when our squiggly human emotion things are like backed by like real fact. Because so much of our experience is not real. Anyway.
The math told him.
The
math validates like
Yep.
positive human emotions.
The math
Yeah.
made me do it.
Instincts. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and just like as a way to behave, even if you're trying to be selfish in this world, if you're like a sociopath and you're trying to like do the best thing for you, cooperation is important. And it breaks down, these are the three traits that always win in games like this over a long period of time. These are the three things evolutionarily that make cooperation happen and make you win. And so I think it's as I talk about it, it sounds nerdy and mathematical, but it's really an emotional, like I don't know, 30 minutes to, I think, examine human nature and honestly just like all life and why and how things cooperate and how it's beautiful and also like utilitarian to cooperate.
World leaders should probably watch that video.
Yeah.
Literally a top comment, which has now become the thumbnail, was like, this is one of those videos that every human on the planet should watch. Because like, if people could just get around it, it would solve a lot of problems.
And how do we access the video other than typing in everything you just said?
It's on YouTube by the channel Veritasium, and it's called What Game Theory Reveals About Life, the Universe, and Everything.
Hey, Hitchhiker's
There
Reference.
you go.
Oh, cool.
Oh,
Full circle.
Anyway, Trisha, do you want to add anything to what you're watching? Do you want to like talk about what you're thinking about you might watch in the past?
I want to go to bed.
Yeah.
What's Holly Hunter up to these days? Let's all brace yourselves.
God. This has been our trilogy on the Bourne trilogy. Thank you, patrons, for supporting the show and making it possible. This is a mini season because we have more things, a new season that we want to get to and wanted to make sure we had room for. So that will be coming very soon. So stay tuned for details on that as well. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major. Thank you to our editor, Jose Gomez. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Rand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. All of our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet and say hi. And we will see you soon for the next season, Ambiguous.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.